beautiful spring morning. Kia ora and welcome everyone to our online councillors as well. Councillor Pike, Deputy Mayor Angela and Councillor Jeff. We welcome you being able to join us online as well as in the chamber here. It does make things a little trickier in terms of question timing, but I'm sure we can work through that with the agenda that we have this morning. In opening our meeting this morning, let's join together in our karakia. So kia inoi tātou, tuia e runga, tuia e raro, tuia e roto, tuia e waho, tuia na kaiamahi o te kaunihira o Kirikiriroa, whaia te iti kahurangi, kia kia mau, kia ita, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Thank you, everyone. Before we get into the business of the day, I'd just like us as a meeting to note that this is the last meeting that we have David Bryant with us today. So, yeah, sad day really, I think. David, your expertise has been something that we've drawn on often as a committee here, and it stood us in good stead, I think. I think you've got a clear mind and you help us through some of those toughest of financial matters that we grapple with. Almost 9 years of service to us and our community and the committee as a whole in various guises, so it can't go unnoticed. I've got a small bit of something that can show our appreciation, and perhaps in the next month or so you'll have a bit more time to relax and enjoy it.
Thank you so much. Let's give them an Andrew pass.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Tim. It's a good idea for that. Also, though, we haven't lost him altogether yet because he's still with Council until the 22nd, is it, of November? So there'll be various other committee opportunities to be able to let David know how much you appreciate him. And also that date gives us the opportunity to overlay David's experience with our new Chief Financial Officer, and so congratulations to Gary Connolly on being appointed to that role. I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting him very soon and have the opportunity to work with him in the future. So we congratulate Gary on that appointment as well. Now to our agenda. Firstly, apologies. We have a partial apology from Mayor Southgate, Councillor Pike, who will leave us mid-morning. So thank you for that notification, Councillor Pike, and for full absence from Councillor Naudu Rolfe. Do we have any other apologies to note this morning? Councillor Mark mentioned sausage rolls, so thank you. Can I have a mover and a seconder? I'll second. Thank you. You've got that, staff. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. A confirmation of our agenda as you have on your run sheet this morning.
Madam Chair, just a question on that. I note there's no Chair's report.
That's right.
Are you intending to give a verbal Chair's report? Or?
No, I don't think so at this stage. I think the previous Chair's report was full and gave us some many things to contemplate and think about in the next few months. And there's an opportunity in the next 2 or 3 months, I think, to be able to act on those reckonings through our preparation for our long-term plan amendment. Thanks, Councillor Wilson. So, confirmation of the agenda. I'll move, as seconded by my Deputy Moko. All those in favour? Aye. Any declarations of interest, colleagues? There being none, we'll then move through to the public forum. And we welcome John McDonald to up to the microphone. John, welcome to the meeting. You know our process. You have 5 minutes to present to us, and I understand that's on items 6 and 7 this morning. The meeting's in your hands. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Okay, we'll start with item 6. Point 15. Council has received confirmation of NZTA subsidy for 2024 to 2027 financial period. This amount is lower than was assumed when preparing the latest long-term plan. Moving on to point 18, quoting, staff consider the matter to be of low significance and that recommendations comply with the Council's legal requirements. I disagree with that comment, especially the low significance part. Still on item 6, moving along to point 25, capital revenue. Quoting from here, capital revenue provides a significant revenue stream for council. And talking about the budget as 64 million. Then point 27 says, note that revenue is project specific and can vary significantly between years. Is this revenue still being counted to inflate the debt revenue limit? Is this responsible given the significant year-to-year variation? So moving on to item 7 in the wider council budget, point 12, quoting from point 12, debt to revenue is now 267%, but your staff consider this favourable against the budget, which predicted it to be 276%. Net debt is 1.179 billion, and the staff consider this favourable against a budget of 1.236 billion. Balancing the books is in a deficit of 54 million, and staff consider this favourable against a budget of 56.3 million. $1.2 billion in debt and running a deficit of 54 million is not good news. For a bit of historical context, back in 2004, the NZ Herald ran the headline, Hamilton City Council Debt Bomb. And the first line of that article reads, Hamilton City Council debt will soar to 157 million next year, and they talk about unexpected costs and budget blowouts and that kind of thing. Moving along to 2020, the Waikato Times runs the headline, Hamilton City Council owes 406 million as debt tsunami approaches. So 1.2 billion is not good news. Still on item 7, we get down to point 18. Quoting, staff consider the matters in this report have low significance and that recommendations comply with the Council's legal requirements. I urge some deeper consideration and not just copying and pasting default comments in these documents. Moving on to wellbeing considerations in item 7. Point 59, the recommendations set out in this report are consistent with that purpose of the 4 wellbeings. Environmental, social and cultural wellbeings are not directly impacted by the annual monitoring report. However, the efficient review and management of council finances supports wider business and delivery of key objectives, etc., etc. And then they go and talk about risks in point 62, there are no known risks associated with the decisions of this report. Now, I don't think there's a lot of decisions, but I think there's a lot of risks associated with what's in this report. Is Council considering the social and cultural impacts of debt levels in the city? Is burdening future generations with huge amounts of debt something cultures in the city view as harmful? When parents tell their children and grandchildren to get out of the city while they still can in the face of rates increases, the debt tsunami, and general deterioration, is this going to cause social and cultural impacts? What if growth doesn't pay for growth? What if the expected growth does not occur? How will the billions in debt be paid? Who will pay the debt and the interest? Thank you.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks for your questions. I think you've given us many things to think about. Kia ora.
Any questions?
Thanks. We're out of time, and so my apologies. We don't have the opportunity to do that this morning. Okay, so we now move into confirmation of the Finance and Monitoring Committee open minutes of the 29th of August. Are there any matters of or inaccuracies or omissions that anybody wanted to highlight? No? Do I have a mover? Anna Casey Cox, Councillor Cox, a seconder. Councillor Moko is shaking his head, so that's...
That meeting.
ruling on that is that we didn't necessarily need to be at the meeting in order to confirm those.
All right.
So, although we can take a seconder from Councillor Thompson. All those in favour? Thank you, carried. Now we welcome Ian. Kia ora, Ian. Come up to the microphone. We are now moved on to the Capital Portfolio Monitoring Report. Ian, if you'd like to introduce your report and speak to the matters of key interest there. One note from me is that I see that we haven't got our usual program sheets this time. It may be that we're quite early into the process. And so I just wanted to note, though, that it's a really good visual way for us to be able to interpret that information. So I hope it's going to be coming back in the future to us. Kia ora.
Yeah. Good morning, Chair Maxine. Good morning, councillors. I was smiling as you were saying that because, we do appreciate the importance of the program sheets and the benefit they provide to elected members in terms of the progress of the capital program. We are very much bringing them back to this chamber. We did take a slight pause, largely because of maybe high workloads coming out at the end of the financial year and with everything else going on, but equally, given the dynamics around local water done well in the NZTA program, we just wanted to have a little bit more certainty before we moved forward. We've also had quite significant changes in our PMO office through FutureFit, and we just want to make sure we bring everyone together and what we deliver to Chamber as a worthwhile and useful document, because I think it adds a lot of benefit to this report and it translates the numbers into physical delivery, which I think is really important. So yeah, 100% is coming back.
Thank you.
So on that note then, look, so really we took this because it's the first 2 months of the financial year and it's the beginning of the new LTP period. Look, we've taken the opportunity really to focus on the revised budget, given how topical it is at the moment. So just wanted to cover some high-level numbers. There's a couple of sections in the report which I'm going to hand over to Chris Allen to give you an update on. One's on the request for the approved contract sum increase, and the other one's around the increase in the approved contract sum that the CE signed off on for the WTP storage. So I'll just cover my points. So look, just high-level stuff. Look, the approved budget for this year, as per LTP, 344.5 million in expenditure with 65.5 million of associated revenue. However, we know that once the LTP is set, there are a number of changes come along that impact on that number, and it's really key that the purpose of this report is to be able to come in here and table those changes, make you aware of them, and more importantly, understand the impact of those through the financial modelling and what the impact is. And that's why you'll see in the report after this, the report that Sarah will present, that they talk about introducing those changes through that financial modelling position. The key changes in the budget tend to fall into a number of categories. First one is we're now confirming that deferrals and brought forwards that came out of the 23-24 financial year, that's last financial year, and they were at 55.2 million in cost and had associated revenue of 14.8. So if I add those two together and come to a net position, we're sitting at about that 40 million that we had been indicating to Council previously, or the Finance Committee previously, in terms of what we felt those net deferrals were. We've also started to now talk about current deferrals. And even though I know we're only 1 year into the 2 months into the new financial year, we do have one significant deferral, which is moving the retiming of the State Highway 26 revocation work that we're doing and associated with the NZTA. So there's that one there. And I will note at that point that it's quite important that Council, through the LTP, resolved that we would set a 50 million deferral target for this year, a 50 million target for next year, and then an 80 million deferral target thereafter. So that 6 million is already starting to contribute to that 50 million target. The other big change we have at this point is the NZTA, the impact from the change in the NZTA subsidy levels. Like, I want to stress at this point that Council will have a workshop tomorrow. Council also have a meeting on the 31st of October where we'll go into that in far greater detail. So at the moment, all we've effectively done for the purposes of modelling, and you see it dovetails into Sarah's report following, is that we've removed the subsidy, given that we've had confirmation from NZTA. Equally, we've also removed the associated expenditure with that subsidy, effectively leaving a net what we call the Council's local share within the budget. Really, to be simple, just for the purposes of financial modelling, and I'm sure David or Sarah will cover that a little bit later. The actual expenditure after 2 months, 26.8 million, associated revenue of 17.4. Look, if you have a look in the report, you'll see that as a run rate. That's a little bit behind where we were 12 months ago. And I think a lot of that's talking to the fact that we are in a state of change with the NZTA program and what's happening in that local water program. So that's what's happening in that space. We've identified a couple of risks which I would like to make you aware of. The first one is a project risk on Collins Road wastewater storage, where the groundwater is exceeding consent levels. Now, we do believe that's going to probably that will lead to a likely delay in delivery of the project and potentially an increase in costs, and Chris can talk to that. The other portfolio and the other risk I want to talk is a high-level portfolio risk we've talked about. Again, it talks to this NZTA issue. If Council chooses through the deliberations to cancel projects that are already in progress because they're no longer deemed affordable under strategy, then any costs we have incurred to date would need to be immediately, we call it written off or expensed through to the P&L. So best example recently is when Council made a decision around the pedestrian bridge across the Waikato River. So sure, with the IEF, there was substantial costs already sunk that we had to expense. It would be the same situation here, but we can't quantify that until such time as we understand what those projects may be. But once they are, we would come back to you. But I think it's important we understand that as one of the consequences of said decision. So I think on that note, I'll let Chris pick up the two other issues being...
Yep, if I could quickly just jump on there on two contractual administration issues. So the first one is paragraph 43, the emergency storage upgrades. So these were 3 tanks that we put under our roads to help with our wastewater problem. So the Chief Executive has got a delegation to exceed the approved contract sum by no more than 5% or 250k. We've exceeded by 3.5% and under the 250k. So the Chief Executive has exercised his delegation, but the delegation just requires us to report that up to Council. So it's just fulfilling the delegation requirements. The second one is actually asking for a decision of Council. So this relates to our Ruakura Spine Road project management. So we employed a company called Tika Management way back 4 years ago in 2020, just after COVID, to manage all of our Ruakura connection projects. Part of the approval for all those contracts was a Tika management at $1 million. So the whole program of works they managed was 40.6 million, mostly funded by the Provincial Growth Unit and Tainui Group Holdings, but with us managing the contract. So 4 years later, our likely costs are going to exceed that 1 million by 100,000. So we're just asking for approval to increase our approved contract sum from 1 million to 1.1 million. We are still under budget for the whole project. So through that whole COVID years, we've delivered the project for probably about $1 million under the 40.6 budget. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and that's the end of the presentation from you both. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. First question, I guess, through to you, Chris Allen, if I could. Is this the sort of risk that council bears when we manage a project, even though a majority of funding is coming from other parties? The fact that, you know, if there's either a budget blowout or something changes, that we then have to pick up the difference?
So, sorry, for this particular project, we capped our risk. So councillors that were here at the time might recall that our contribution was $5 million capped for the whole project. So if anything went over, including this this contract here, was all at the cost of PGU or TGH. Oh, in fact, PGH, Provincial Growth Unit, capped their fund as well, so all the risks sat with Tainui Group Holdings, and that was very clear. So we managed our risk by capping our contribution to the whole project.
But, so why are we putting in some additional money?
This is a contract administration issue. It's not asking for extra funding. The funding is paid by the Provincial Growth Unit and TGH. So it's a contract administration issue within the budgeted funding.
Okay, I think that's clearer. Okay, thank you. In regards to the sunken costs for the bridge that will never be across the river, the one that we've canned, where are we at with an indication of what that quantum is?
Oh, you're testing my memory. That decision was made prior to the end of the financial year, and those costs were identified and were expensed as part of the 23-24 financial year. So they will appear through the 23-24 annual report.
Thank you.
Sorry,
that doesn't help me with the figure.
Yeah, I know, and I'm loath to get. I don't have a number. I can certainly get a number for you.
I'll jump in there. My recollection, it was 1.9 million that went into the report coming up to council.
Right. So, despite our best efforts, we still sunk 1.9, was it?
Correct.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. Ian, firstly, the State Highway 26 Morrinsville roundabout being deferred. When is that being deferred to?
Chris might want to jump in on this, but it's effectively an 11.2 million project with 100% funding coming in from NZTA to upgrade that road.
Yeah.
All we're effectively doing is changing the timing. It was meant to substantially start this year and then move through next year. I think we're now talking about it starting this year, substantial construction the following financial year, and then it being completed in the 26-27 financial year.
Right. Yep. Thank you. Next question for Chris on the Collins Road with a consent delay. I'm just wondering if there's any lessons to be learned from this in relation to, if the consent had been more liberal in terms of what was requested by consultants for permitted water levels, then we might have avoided a delay. And so if we approach consents to try and get more wiggle room, is that something we should learn for the future on this?
You are 100% correct on that, and that is one of the lessons and one of the things we're looking at. And your words were quite good, to get a more liberal consenting regime. So, with the information we had, we just didn't have that liberality, if that's a word, which would have helped. And so clearly finding that out halfway through a contract, as you know, is quite challenging.
Yeah.
So 100% correct.
Right, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Any further questions? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, I'm just wondering if you could help me on page 49. So there's the capital revenue summaries there, and it's got Central City program. Can you just help me to understand this, what's the reduction in revenue there for the Central City program?
Sorry, what, can you just give me the
So that's
paragraph number,
page
please?
49 on diligent and of the report, attachment 1. Yeah.
Well, attachment 1 was, because it was the beginning of the new LTP period, that's just a summary of the full LTP approved capital program for that. I'm sorry, I don't know
Okay.
the specifics
Is
to your question.
But that summary, is that compared to before the LTP?
No, this is
No?
the approved
This is approved
LTP
LTP.
24-34 capital program
Yeah.
with associated capital revenue that was signed off.
Yeah, yeah. But this is, okay. I might take this offline, but I'm just trying to get some clarity around, like, we know we've had a reduction in the transport program. There'll be, community as reduction, I presume, in the assumed external funding for things. But I was just trying to understand what the reduction for some of these other things was in terms of, say, Central City program. It's negative 13 million.
So the numbers on the bottom table are revenue, that's not
It's no
reductions?
reduction, no revenue, but a reduction in revenue?
No, that is the revenue.
It is the revenue,
Yeah.
okay, never mind, all right,
So-
yeah.
so-
It's not the friendliest, table to read, so I'll take it offline, but maybe there's another way that we can,
So,
yeah.
and I don't know if it's either confused or help, but if you look at the first column, 24-25, the first column has a total of 344.4 million, which is that capital program. The revenue is the 65 that's
Okay.
associated with that.
Right, okay, cool. I just look at negative red and
Yeah.
I go, that looks bad, so. Okay, excellent, I'll take that offline.
Okay.
Thank you. I get your confusion around that. Red is a bad colour for numbers, I think. It always has that connotation that we're in the negative. Thank you, though. Councillor Huata.
Tēnā koe, Councillor Maxine. Kia ora, Ian. I'm looking at your lanyard and it's making me smile.
Oh, thank you.
So just with the recommendation coming to us to approve the extra 100,000, Chris, sorry, it's a Chris question. Is there potential for you to come back and ask for more? That will be it?
I'm going to put my neck on the line and say very unlikely.
Okay.
Look, we're at the sort of tail end of the project. So the project's, we're just wrapping up all the loose end. We've got a lot of maintenance defects period to go through, but we're pretty much almost certain now on the outcome of that contract, which is great. Yeah.
Kapai, thank you.
Thank you. And a final question from me, actually, Chris, is the project that you talk about, the Spine Road, that's completely different from the Eastern Transport Corridor. Is that correct?
Yes, so just going back in history, we called the whole road from the interchange through to Silverdale right up to Fifth Avenue as the Spine Road. But as we sort of moved into a more multimodal sort of world a few years ago, it was renamed a transport corridor because it was more than just a road. It was service corridor, it was multimodal, etc. So the legacy is that was locked in as Spine Road into the government contract. So to avoid confusion, we've just continued to call that one the Spine Road.
Okay. And the project that we are proposing for future Eastern Transport Corridor is a second program altogether, is that right?
A separate altogether, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Thank you, Ian. Excellent report. Early days, I guess, in terms of it being the long-term plan, but certainly off to a good start. So, colleagues, can I refer you then to page 42, where the recommendation asks us to receive the report and approve an increase of the approved contract sum with Tika Group by $100,000. Do I have a mover? I'm happy to move. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Moko. Kia ora. Oh gosh, thanks Ian for your report. Useful to be able to get an overview of the landscape at the moment. Seems that we're off to a good start, and despite the fact not having our program sheets, it's good to know that they're coming back and completely understand the pressure that the team is under with all of the activities that you're being asked to respond to. So thank you for that. What is, I guess, of concern to me, certainly, is being only a couple of months into our LTP, we are facing some significant changes in terms of potentially reorganising our delivery program based on the shortfall of the Waka Kotahi funding. I guess, you know, we've heard it before that our processes don't necessarily align with those of government, and there's nothing we can do about that, I guess, except to be flexible and have the ability to be able to change. And that's exactly where we'll be going. We've got the opportunity this week to be able to discuss our response to that and to be able to look at a full range of options, and that's entirely the right thing for us to be doing. Also for us to be taking out the funding immediately because we know it isn't coming in, helps us to be able to make sure we stay within the parameters set us. So in terms of it coming to a committee or a workshop this week and then to council meeting at the end of October, my only hope is that councillors can prioritise this and be in attendance so that we all get the opportunity to participate in the discussion, in the workshop and in the solutions that can be coming forward. Kia ora. Anything that you would like to say, Councillor Moko?
I think you've captured it.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Max. I mean, I'll have a lot more to say about Hamilton's financial position in item 7. But I do feel obligated to reiterate some of the concerns that I had raised during the LTP, where I had highlighted the near 100% likelihood that we were not going to receive the funding from Waka Kotahi that we had projected, and that this organisation continues to behave in a manner where, well, we put our shutters on and we keep going, well, we're not 100% sure, so we'll just put it in our LTP, despite all the evidence, and then, boof, the minute we come out of consultation, we implement it, we then discover, surprise, surprise, that we are tens of millions of dollars in the hole. And yet again, we now chase our tails. And so I'm beginning to join a number of the members of the community who are getting concerned about our fiscal approach, our endless appetite for spending, and how close we're sailing to the wind. I read recently a Treasury report back in 2018 predicting and highlighting some significant concerns about Hamilton. And it doesn't appear that we have learnt anything.
I guess that leaves to no other speakers. Right to reply. You paint a sour picture, and I don't agree with it in any way. I think there's good evidence that we as a council consider our whole of our financial position and take measures that will help us to be able to overcome them in the future, and that is evident through our long-term plan and through other changes that we've made and have set up our meeting this week in order to be able to discuss the variances that we need to make. So I don't hold with your view, and so there it is. Committee, let's take that to the vote now. All those in favour of receiving the report and the increase in the contract? Aye. A show of hands, I think, is probably the easiest way with our online councillors.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. Now to item number 7. Let's welcome Sarah for your second meeting. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
And councillors, that's page, gosh, why can't I see it on my, 57 in your diligent pack. Sarah, the meeting's in your hands.
Good morning, councillors. The report is for the year to date to 31st of August, so it includes only 2 months of activity in the current financial year. Council's operating result is $10.4 million favourable compared to budget, and the balancing the books result is $6.2 million favourable. It's been a slow start to the year in some respects due to the uncertainty surrounding NZTA funding and delaying starting of projects or expenditure until Council has had the opportunity to review the impact of the reduced NZTA funding and determined its strategy going forward at the 31st October meeting. You may note the separate reporting for support services, infrastructure and assets. These are asset services that provide capital project delivery across council for various activities, and we determined that it would be more useful and transparent to report these separately rather than mixed in as an overhead with other results for activities. It just makes for variance reporting to be more succinct and easy to understand. The strategy graphs in paragraphs 52 to 54 reflect reporting against the updated 2024 to 34 LTP. The strategy graphs include the impacts of updated opening balances following the 2023-24 financial result, the favourable interest impact of the lower debt starting position, reduction of the NZTA subsidy of $37 million over 3 years, based on the NZTA notifications, and a provisional reduction of the local share capital expenditure for NZTA in years 24-25 through to 26-27 of $33 million. We note that the inclusion of the reduction of the local share capital expenditure in the strategy graphs when there is no decision yet by Council is a departure from usual protocols, but it is a reflection of the required reality in order to ensure that we do not breach debt covenants, and therefore seems a prudent approach to take. The actual decisions taken by Council on 31st of October will be reflected in the next Finance and Monitoring Committee. As a verbal update to this report, significant known variations of note, which are not yet reflected in our forecasts, are the updated electricity and gas charges, for which contracts will be presented in items 9 and 10 of this meeting, and I refer you to those reports for the impacts. Interest costs, the outlook is indicatively reduced by about 0.5% for the unhedged portion of debt, which is likely to produce savings of approximately $2 million in this current financial year. So these 2 items will be included in the financial modelling when we get to the 31st of October. So that's it from me. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sarah. And invite Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Maxine. I'm looking at number 25. I'm hoping somebody might be able to answer this. It mentions a positive variance in operating contributions resulted from a cost recovery process undertaken to address costs related to a historic noise complaint claim. What's that noise complaint claim, and why is it sort of a substantial amount of money?
I'll have to refer that to one of the general managers or...
Sorry, I don't have that information, but I'll get it for you.
Yeah, thank you. That's it.
Councillor Thompson. Oh, that's the end of your questions, Ms. Councillor Bidder? Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for the report. In terms of the debt to revenue, so I just wanted to be totally clear, essentially taking out all of the NZTA subsidy that hasn't been approved, we're projected to still sit within our debt to revenue constraints at this stage.
And as long as we only spend the local share portion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
And just noting on that the meeting this week will be to discuss all of those options, and that's the opportunity for us to be able to really dig into the consequences, I guess, of the loss of that, and the opportunity on what might happen with those other local share funds. Councillor Casey Cox.
Thank you. Just a question around the interest rate swaps and the apparent loss there. I guess I just want to understand, if you wouldn't mind explaining, what that actually achieves for us, that mechanism, just so I can be clear that it's nothing to be concerned with.
So we use interest rate swaps to fix our interest rates to give us a more stable interest profile, so that we are not always subjected to the ups and downs of the market. So we tend to fix some, and what you'll find with interest rate swaps is that there'll be a portion, usually rates are set so that you'll have, over time there'll be a net nil, like if everything was perfect. But there are movements, and so you'll often find that there'll be gains and there'll be losses at different times in the swap curve.
It's a little bit unpredictable, or...
Yeah, but interest rate swaps help us basically create a more predictable curve.
Okay, thank you. That's clear.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Councillor Max. Just on page 61, if I could, the gains and losses, the financial instrument revaluations of 13.4 million. Could you just walk me through that?
Essentially, we have had interest rates, as interest rates fall, some of our fixed rates will be higher than the market rates, and therefore you'll end up with a loss. However, they were fixed at a time when the floating interest rates were higher. So we've had gains on those previously. We might be having a loss now. So it's
like the loss of 13.8 million. What does that reflect? A period of time?
The difference between the market valuation of those swaps in the current market.
If I can just help, it's a book entry. It never materialises, because when we enter into a swap right at the start, that swap is held at a certain price, and that price that we agree to is the price that we pay. Accounting rules require us to revalue swaps every month. So this is just a book entry that'll reverse itself in future periods.
And 44, just the loss of disposal of assets. So this is when we thought there was going to be a longer lifespan on a pipe, and we end up changing it before what we thought, and then we attach a value to it.
Yes.
Right.
So we spend the money up front. We charge depreciation over a useful life, so we might say it's 30 years or whatever it is, depending on what we expect. If we use it for a lesser period of time, there's a loss on disposal for the remaining amount that we haven't depreciated. So it doesn't affect the money that we spent.
Right.
It just means we've replaced it earlier than what we might have estimated
we would get. Right. And final question, it looks like there's some positive news in terms of development contributions that were slightly above budget. Just confirm that I've got that right. I'm looking at Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expenses, page 65.
Yeah.
And I think we had, for the year to date, budgeted 3.5 million. In fact, we're at 3.8.
Correct.
We've noticed a reduction in consents being issued. So can you help me understand these DCs? Roughly when are they stemming from? Are these projects that have been paid, and it could have been a consent many years ago. I'm just trying to understand the volatility of when these DCs. I overheard someone say recently, "Oh, I've got to actually pay my DCs to Hamilton next week $1 million," and I went, "Oh, that's nice."
Yeah.
Just help me understand the volatility and why it often takes so long.
I'll refer that question to Blair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wilson. DCs are triggered at various stages, as councillors will be aware, predominantly around, in the case of residential section development title, but in the case of infill, that is more around either the title being created for section or the building consent being granted. So it is somewhat both predictable and unpredictable. The team do a lot of work to model and forecast when the DCs may be received, but as you say, Councillor Wilson, it's also dependent sometimes on the intention of the developer, who may get a project to a point and then hold and not actually seek to get through that next gateway to pay the DCs. So the team are obviously being quite cautious around the DC revenue for obvious reasons. The economy has slowed, activity has slowed, and so we are well aware that whilst we are favourable at the present time, that position may change in the coming period of the end of the financial year.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, Councillor Wilson? No, thank you. Others? Very well. Thank you, Sarah, for your report. Early days, as I said before, but some good discussion. Kia ora. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Sarah to second. Very well. Your debate, Councillor Wilson? Not yet. No? Very good. Councillor Thompson.
It's positive that, I mean, in terms of taking out the NZTA subsidy, we are currently still sitting within our debt constraints, and there's the ability, when we review that program, to then look at that again to further ensure that we've got that headroom for in terms of our debt capacity. And I would like to comment also on the previous speaker in the previous debate. You know, I think that Council was aware that some of the NZTA projects were hopeful, but at the same time, if you don't put them in there, you absolutely have no hope of getting any subsidy. So it would have been completely self-defeating for projects to not put in projects that we believe are important for the city. Because we would have ruled ourselves out completely to start with. But also, even if we had reduced that program, we'd still be facing the issue of having to revise our transport program and have another look at this, because the government's decisions around subsidies were far worse than what any of us anticipated. I don't think any of us expected them to, for example, completely slash funding for footpath renewals and to come out with literally nothing for our low-cost, low-risk program. I think there was some expectation there would at least be something there, but particularly for footpaths, you know, personally at least, I found that surprising. So, you know, we can't, and at the same, and we have always known that we've been able to come back to this committee to review things as well. So I think some of the comments are particularly negative and cynical, and I think we need to work together on this problem rather than trying to, I guess, really focus on that really negative narrative every single finance meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah. Councillor Casey Cox.
Yeah, just to talk what Councillor Sarah has just said, really, and thank the staff for their support in helping us manage the significantly reduced subsidy in a really prudent and thoughtful way. And I'm confident that we will get together through the conversations we're going to be having tomorrow and onwards, that we will get to a good place and good decision with our transport funding. Yeah, and as Councillor Sarah said, I don't think we expected it to be so negative, because we are in a climate crisis, and not investing in footpaths and safe trips for kids to get to school, etc., and good public transport infrastructure does seem rather ludicrous. So anyway, that's what we've been dealt, and I'm just thankful to the staff we've got for helping us manage our way through that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Maxine. 2 points to cover. There is a note in the fees and charges section that there has actually been a higher income from consent applications than expected. It does note that this is due to people trying to get in early before the fees and charges increase. So that might look good for last year, but it's not going to look good for next year because we won't be getting that money. Balancing the books is a significant improvement, yet despite that, debt goes up every year to 2.4 billion by 2034. That's not a good result. There is nothing cynical about pointing this out, but plenty of negative. As noted in the upcoming LGFA report, this is secured by rates, and rates are secured against people's houses. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Bidder. No other speakers? Before I go to write a reply, I guess that's what yours is there for?
Two types of
Yeah, well, I think we won't. I gave you the
I'm
opportunity at the opening of the debate to
happy
do that.
I'm happy to let you, in
Thank
the spirit of not wanting to be cynical,
Thank
I'm happy
you.
to let you have a go first.
Good, and I will, and I'll just thank Sarah and the team. I thank Sarah and the team for the really hard work that you've put in, and acknowledge that, again, like Ian's team, balancing all of the other demands. So thank you for that, and acknowledge the workload that you're facing at the moment. It's certainly something that we have a lot of empathy for. And it's early days in this part of the cycle, so absolutely can see some really positive aspects coming through in your report. Thank you for that. And again, acknowledge that it's disappointing to see that the projects that Hamilton have prioritised in our transport and projects isn't endorsed by government and doesn't receive the funding that we might have hoped that it would. Councillor Sarah, you're absolutely right. We have had ambitious programs that we've put up, but that through the long-term plan have been endorsed by our public, and so must recognise that value of that. However, you know, we do need to make those changes, and those opportunities are coming up for us to do that. It's prudent for us to be able to make adjustments to the debt to revenue and balancing the books figures, because, you know, it's really important that we know that these changes are coming, and so not try to shoot ourselves in the foot by presenting a graph that isn't accurate for tomorrow. So I also note that in our previous meeting around that debt to revenue, there was some real confusion from Councillor Wilson about breaching that, and so I wanted to be really clear that that is not going to be happening this year, next year, or at any time in our 10-year plan at this stage, and you can see that on page 62, Councillor Wilson. Kia ora. Councillor Wilson. Right.
Yeah, let me start with my biggest concern when it comes to the transport issues is we're going to, as elected members, assume that broader support that we glean from our broader consultation process enables us to, when it comes to transport, to assume that our share component needs to be spent in its entirety, where I would argue that we consulted on the basis that our share was going to be part of a much bigger funding pie and that really we need to start from scratch. I'm also very concerned that there will be a propensity that we will try to raise our debt to revenue and use that as an excuse to try to borrow to fill what NZTA has withdrawn. And I think that would be a mistake. I do find it fascinating that I'm accused of being cynical. Maybe I'm a little jaded. Maybe I'm a little tired, because I've spent many years working with a number of councillors, including my good friend, Councillor Thomas, on issues. Her name is, I apologise. And maybe I'm just tired of not being listened to or failing to take up some of my advice, the advice I gave you about the inflation issues, the interest rates, all the things that we knew were coming that was ignored. And again, I advised coming into the LTP that we weren't going to get all the funding from NZTA. And so I think no elected member should be sitting around this table when you read the financial analysis of Standards & Poor's. They use language that should really scare you. You should look at the feeling that people have about our fiscal management. And I think we will be measured on that.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'll now put the motion, and you'll find that on page 83. Oh, am I in the right place? No, I beg your pardon. Page 57. So with a show of hands, all those in favour? Against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, councillors. We now have item number 8, and we're welcoming online Ian Mickle from the, I beg your pardon, Andrew Mickle from the New Zealand Local Government Agency, who will be presenting their annual report. Kia ora, Andrew, and welcome to our meeting. Most of you will know Andrew from previous meetings, so the floor is yours, Andrew.
Kia ora, thanks for the invitation. Sorry I can't be there in person. We've just got a board meeting today, which clashes. Otherwise I would have loved to have come. I will share my screen. So, so can you see that?
Yes, we can, and also,
Okay,
councillors, that's available to you in the back of your pack from page, 156. Kia ora. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, I will go through the annual report relatively quickly. There's no surprises in the 12 monthly sort of results, and then I'll make a few comments just on water and also the proposed change to the net debt to revenue covenant to cater for growth councils. So you can see there is a summary of our operating sort of performance. The top left-hand box is our operating gain. We had a challenging year in terms of the profitability in 2023, mainly due to having to increase the size of the liquid assets portfolio, but we're back on track with a $10 million profit in the 2024 year, and we're expecting that to grow in coming years. You can see on the top right-hand box the retention of equity into the business. So as the amount of the lending book is growing, we're sort of retaining that equity in the business as well. Right. In terms of the performance targets, we didn't meet two. One was the operating expenses, which are targeted to be below $10 million. They came out at 11.8 million, and it was pretty much the additional operating expenses were due to a big increase in the approved issuer levy, which was nearly $2 million. So that accounts for pretty much all of that extra cost base. What the approved issuer levy is a levy that LGFA or any debt issuer, when they issue in foreign currency, has to pay 2% of the coupon to the New Zealand government. So we have raised this with the New Zealand government that, you know, it is a tax on council borrowings. But it's something we can't avoid, along with any other borrower that New Zealand borrower that issues in foreign currencies. And I'll explain why, but in the last year we have moved to issue in Australian dollar bonds, and in the coming year we're probably going to issue into the European market as well. And I'll put up a slide on the growth in council debt. In terms of these, I just touch on around 90% of sort of market share. So we're still seeing Auckland Council and Dunedin City Council doing some borrowing in their own name. Auckland Council is too big for LGFA to do all of their borrowing requirements. So we lend Auckland about a third of what they require. And Auckland make up around 20% of LGFA's lending box. So even though we lend a third, that third is still quite a big share of our lending. So they're our largest borrower. And the other one is the 93% satisfaction rate from councils that we survey. The other one we didn't meet was we were planning to do 2 sustainable loans in the last year. We did one. We did do 4 climate action loans versus the target of 3. But we see the whole sustainability thing as just a long-term journey. So we're not too worried about missing annual sort of targets. What we do is engage with councils as they are willing to do things in the sustainability or climate action space. We've just employed a new person, Helen Mahoney's joining us next month, so we'll increase our sort of resources. One thing we haven't been able to do is make sustainable loans on water assets. That's because there's been too much uncertainty over recent years as to where those water loans would end up sitting. But the water sector is something that would lend itself really well to sort of green and sustainable lending. So now that is going to remain with councils. We're going to engage with councils quite actively over coming years, regardless of whether they retain things within water assets within the council or they move it to a CCO. This is just to show you the gross in council debt. So you can see quite a big jump up from 22 to 23, and it will be higher again as at June 24. It's not a surprise because we can see with council long-term plans that there is growth in debt sort of projected. And when we look at the 2024 to 34 LTPs, even though not all councils have done those yet, we can sort of approximate based on their sort of past forecasts. So we're estimating that council sector debt at June 2034 will be around 55 billion. So we're going to see that continual growth in debt. What it's doing to LGFA is, this is our council lending on a 12 monthly rolling basis. So if you go back to 2012 through to 2019, we were lending the sector sort of $1 to $2 billion a year. That jumped up to around sort of 3 billion, and you can see in the last year it's jumped up to around 6 billion. So LGFA is having to go to the market and raise that debt. $6 billion is just too great a number for the New Zealand market to absorb, and that's why we issued bonds into the Australian market. So that's good because it diversifies our funding base. But just to sort of highlight, that's why we've ended up with this approved issuer levy, because we now have to issue in foreign currency. All the money we raise in Australia, we swap that back into New Zealand dollars, so we don't end up with any currency risk. And the margins which we're able to borrow from the Australian market actually are about the same as what we're getting in New Zealand at the moment. So there's no additional cost other than the approved issuer levy that we have to pay. CCO lending. So LGFA obtained approval from councils to lend to CCOs in November 2019. So since then, we have lent to 6 CCOs. They're all actually CCTOs. And we can only do that where councils provide either uncalled capital or a guarantee. So in respect of water, that's quite important that we can lend to a new water CCO, providing the council provide a guarantee or guarantee their share of the CCO. But for what Auckland Council is proposing with Watercare, where they've asked the government to pass legislation which prohibits Auckland Council financially supporting Watercare, LGFA will not be able to lend to Watercare or any other CCO that councils don't provide a guarantee to. If we wanted to go down that path, we'd have to come back and would need approval from all 77 of our council members. So that's, we need 100% of them to agree. So if one doesn't, we can't make a change to our multi-issuer deed. We need also for the LGFA board to approve it, and each CCO has bespoke covenants, which is, again, when we talk about water CCOs, we've raised what they might be, but they will be negotiated with each CCO. The loan pricing when we lend to CCOs is the same as what we lend to the parent council at. So in August, the Minister of Local Government announced that LGFA would extend its existing CCO framework to lend to water CCOs. Again, they need to be financially supported by the council. They can be single owned or they can be multiply owned. So this is important in terms of the options that the government have given councils. They've provided 5 councils. I suspect that the community trust or the non-supported one, other than Watercare, we're not going to see. So you know the 3 options that remain are that water remains within the council. Councils create 100% owned water CCO, or councils create a multiply owned CCO, and whatever your council chooses, we're happy to support that decision. But just to give you, to put the sort of options on the table, and we have been engaging with the council on that. So I think we've had quite a constructive dialogue to date. The other change that we've announced, and this has come about really through a lot of good work that the LGFA Shareholders Council's done in conjunction with the LGFA board. So this has been an ongoing discussion, and where we've got to is we're going to put a resolution to the AGM which will allow councils to apply for a bespoke net debt to revenue limit from the current 280% up to a maximum of 350. At the moment, councils can apply for a bespoke covenant, but they need approval from shareholders to do that. So what we're asking is that rather than shareholders give that approval, the LGFA board will be able to approve that. So we think that makes sense because it provides a bit more certainty for high growth councils, that when they put a case that makes sense to the LGFA board, that there's more certainty that they will get approval for that, whereas going to shareholders very much depend on what shareholders are thinking at any point in time. Why we want to make this available to growth councils is, I think, one of the limitations with the 280% that applies to all councils with an external credit rating, it treats all councils the same. So we recognise that councils are quite different in their growth requirements. So this just enables us to cater to the high growth councils that need to invest up front for growth. And the good thing about growth is that it will generate revenue over time, either through development contributions, financial contributions, or additional rating units. So while it's not a perfect science, investing in growth does sort of pay for itself. And we've had the Infrastructure Commission look at this, and they were very much in agreement that this is beneficial for growth councils. They were going to borrow anyway through using the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act. This just enables them to borrow for growth in a more cost-effective and less onerous way. We've said it's available to the universe of Tier 1 and Tier 2 councils, but not all Tier 1 and Tier 2 councils we would define as high growth. So again, the LGFA board will look at that when applications are made. So I will finish there and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. That's a very comprehensive and thoughtful presentation to us. I'm sure we'll have many questions. If I could just start out with that final point that you're making about the Tier 1 and 2 councils. Your last point there talks about a council borrower watch list. Currently, and in the past actually, Hamilton City Council have held a portion of our a percentage as an opportunity to address financial shocks or to be able to respond to disasters of any kind, whether it's financial or climate, and that was at around 20%. Is that something that would be viewed positively by the councillor borrower watch list should Hamilton decide to approach the LGFA for an increased debt to revenue ratio?
Yeah, so the other thing that the board has said is that potentially the bespoke covenant would also be available to councils in the event of a natural disaster. So that might give councils some comfort that if they are up against their headroom and something happens, such as the Hawke's Bay floods, that they have this additional option. But any bespoke covenant would probably have to be something that would agreed alongside, you know, the development of a financial strategy with the council and with the government to make sure everyone was on the same page. But yeah, so it's available for high growth, and it's available potentially in the event of a natural disaster. But even if you didn't apply for a bespoke covenant immediately, actually knowing that it's available to you is something that probably gives you a little bit of comfort and probably means, without telling you what you should or shouldn't do, you know, you probably don't need to be quite as concerned about keeping a buffer because you now have this extra tool available to you.
Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I have questions on 3 different things, so ask for your indulgence.
I'll get my pen out.
Thanks. Okay, I'll ask them one at a time. Andrew, firstly, on the slide number 11, it says that the higher debt to revenue cap would likely be available for Tier 1 and 2 councils for investment in growth infrastructure. So just trying to understand, obviously the purpose of it is for investment in growth infrastructure, but are there going to be some kind of constraints, requirements to ensure that it's going towards growth infrastructure? Or is that to the councils to determine?
Yeah, we haven't had an application yet, so I can't be exactly categorical about what the board is saying. But there's genuinely goodwill on LGFA's part, as there is with the Shareholders' Council, to try and facilitate the investment in growth, as opposed to, a council is up against its headroom. It can't invest in growth because it has no borrowing capacity, and therefore you can't bring on more rating units and things, but will sort of pay for itself anyway. The intention isn't that this covenant is available for renewal of water infrastructure, but with the renewal of infrastructure, it's possible that while you might renew something, you also catering for increased growth by increasing sort of capacity. So there potentially is a little bit of blurring of the lines, but what we'd be looking for is that, there is genuine population growth, there is investment in new infrastructure to cater for that, as opposed to a council using it just to renew their existing infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you.
We also respect, it's not, again, there's a little bit of blurring in lines because growth also could be for things like tourism. If you think about Queenstown, they're not just catering for new rating units for the resident population, but they might also need to cater for infrastructure to cope with tourism growth.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
So what we're trying to do is align it as well with the government's, not only the current government's, but future government's policy statement on urban development, so that whatever the government is requiring councils to do, we're trying to get what our strategy is will sort of align with that to help councils comply with what they're being asked to do.
Okay. In terms of, another question is in terms of the slide on page 8, on slide 8, and we can see this acceleration of overall debt. Have you guys got a analysis of kind of what's driving that? Is it essentially catching up on growth, or just interested in the key drivers behind that acceleration?
I think the two big things are an increased level of capex in terms of projects being done. I mean, part of that's been driven by waters and the acknowledgement that water, there's a water regulator in place now, and councils are going to need to comply. There's also an element of inflation in there. You would have seen the Inframetrics report that was done for LGNZ, but they highlighted that over a 3-year period, for example, the cost of bridges went up by 38%. Other infrastructure not as much, but you still had a huge inflation component in there now, and you've probably experienced that yourself versus sort of 3 or 4 years ago. So it's the combination of the two things. Councils are doing more and it's costing more to do it. But it's not a bad thing because, we know we have an infrastructure deficit, and the way we address that is through investment in infrastructure. So we're going to see this trend continue for a number of years.
Thank you. Final question through Chair is You mentioned, Andrew, that only a third of Auckland's lending is through LGFA, and that's because of their size. Just in terms of other councils and their growth, do you see that becoming an issue for anyone else, or is it essentially a Auckland issue simply because of their size compared to everyone else?
Yeah, so Auckland, if you look at Auckland's debt as a percentage of sector debt is around 50%. So the problem from LGFA, if we lent Auckland all of their debt, it would make up 50% of our lending book, and the rating agencies would feel uncomfortable that that is too concentrated. We have too much risk on a single council. We can't escape that problem totally because there's not that many councils in New Zealand, and certainly not many large ones. So I think Auckland now is around sort of 20%, and then our next biggest is Christchurch, that probably just over sort of 10. But Christchurch used to be a lot larger, but again, their level of capex has slowed down a bit after the sort of earthquake rebuild and things. So we do actually map out diversification of our lending book, and it is becoming more diversified than it was over recent years. So that is a positive.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Sarah. Good questions. Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Andrew, I want to better understand the risk Hamilton is taking on as a guarantor. So say our neighbour, Waipa District Council, had a blowout, some sort of failure. The rates revenue doesn't cover our operating costs at the moment and won't for a few years. What happens? How do we pay?
So the way the GFA guarantee works, we have 72 councils that are guarantors. The council's share of the guarantee is based on your rates income, so Hamilton's rate income is a percentage of the guaranteeing council's rates income. So I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think it's probably around sort of 5%, that sort of mark. So if LGFA called up 100 million of capital, then Hamilton would need to put in $5 million. What we're doing is councils are not guaranteeing other councils. Hang on, so just one second. So you're not guaranteeing other councils, you're guaranteeing LGFA. So LGFA would have to be at risk of defaulting. It does not matter if another council sort of defaults. We would sort of manage that separately through recovering any debt that was owed over through imposing a special charge that a receiver could do on that sort of council. So happy to come and speak at another time on how the whole guarantee structure sort of works, because it is a little bit sort of complex. But if the guarantee was called, then that money would be invested in new equity in the business in LGFA. It wouldn't just be a donation.
Right, thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Casey Cox.
Kia ora, Andrew. Just a question in regards to the rating that we recently received from Standard & Poor's. I'm just interested in the LGFA's perspective on that, and if they consider it material or, just a reflection on that from your perspective.
It's not a surprise to LGFA because we can see the trend that's coming in terms of council sort of borrowing. What I would say is if New Zealand or New Zealand councils want to address the infrastructure deficit, then we're going to have to go through a period of time, of years, where we borrow more than normal to invest in sort of infrastructure. So it's sort of cyclical, if you can think about that. Some councils' water infrastructure is in much better shape than others. So in terms of water, the need to invest in infrastructure is going to be felt a lot more acutely in places like Wellington than it will be in somewhere like Selwyn, which is pretty much brand new city. So we're not overly concerned as long as councils have financial strategies that are sustainable in the longer term.
Okay, thank you.
And A+ ratings are still good by, you know, the highest rated bank in New Zealand is AA minus. So, you know, an A+ rating by international standards is still very high, and S&P would make that sort of point as well. One of the other challenges is that S&P are downgrading the New Zealand institutional framework. They've got it on negative watch at the moment, the institutional framework for councils, that is. And that's simply because they're looking at the level of debt of New Zealand councils compared with other similar sort of jurisdictions, and noting that's high. So at the moment, New Zealand councils are rated 1 on a scale of 1 to 6, and that's likely to be moved to 2. So it's still very good, but it's not as good as, you know, if we'd been able to keep it as a 1.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just interested in your loans, your green or sustainable loan products. I guess, like, are you seeing more interest from councils, particularly given the change in the transport funding that councils have received in regards to active transport, I suppose, or green transport? Are you seeing more engagement with councils around that particular fund for that purpose?
Yeah, a lot of transport expenditure that councils undertake probably aren't eligible for sustainable loans. Things in the public transport space would be, like sort of buses or electric buses, for example. But things along sort of roads and things that are maintenance won't meet the criteria. So the areas that are more likely to meet the criteria are things in the water space. Buildings can, as long as they're 5-star green buildings. Social loans, so we've done one of those in the housing space, and we're working with another council on that, or anything to do in the environmental space that probably regional councils are more likely to do. But we can also work with you on the emissions sort of product as well, which would mean all of the councils borrowing, if you have an emissions reduction plan in place, become eligible for the climate action loans. So we're happy again to come and speak to you in more detail on the sustainability space. It is a bit challenging for the sector because larger councils tend to have better resources allocated to this space. Once you go down to the rural councils, they really don't have anyone dedicated to sustainability. So it's quite hard for them to dedicate the resource to get the loans through the application sort of process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anna. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Could you help me understand, could you define what LGFA defines a growth council to be? What is your clear measure of growth?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we had a lot of internal debate. So we started out listing the specific councils we thought based on forecast population growth. That's what the Ministry of Environment used to do originally when you looked at the first NPS on urban development, but they've moved now to the definition of Tier 1 and Tier 2 councils. So we had a talk to sort of DIA about this, and so in leaving it a little bit more open, I guess was catering to the fact that growth growth can change quite quickly. So what might not be a high growth council today under what we would define it might be tomorrow. But if you want to look at the population measure, then it was defined at 10% population growth over the next 10 years.
Right.
But what Stats New Zealand think is the population growth may be very different than what an individual council thinks. So again, we have to sort of look at the merits of the application that is put before the board.
So, sorry, respectfully, I was just trying to, you're a lending facility, you're in the business of lending money, and I just want to understand clearly, currently, what is the measure you use to determine where a growth, and I think you've told me, 10% population growth over the next 10 years.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
So we've opened it up to Tier 1 and Tier 2 councils. Those councils can make an application. As mentioned earlier, we wouldn't define all those when I look at Tier 1 and 2 councils as high growth. So then again, we will look at, the forecast population growth to look at approximately that 10% growth over the next sort of 10 years. And then we will look at the application that, is the additional headroom being used to invest in growth infrastructure, such as roads, water, community facilities, to open up new rating units.
Right. Has LGFA had a clarity from the current government in regards to what they define as nice to have versus core local government business?
No, we haven't had that discussion with them. But LGFA has always taken the policy or the position that, we respect the democratic process. So as long as you have a financial strategy that we believe is sustainable, then we'll respect the democratic process.
Okay, thank you. I've just
and that goes with water as well. So.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. It is correct to say that Council Hamilton could have a bespoke covenant that simply stays, we keep the 280 currently, but in a disaster scenario, we go to 350. That is a covenant that we could put in play?
Yeah, in a natural disaster, my personal view is that would have to be something that the government would have to be involved in as well, because when you look at the Hawke's Bay, for example, the government is making a contribution to the cost. So we need to work with the government and the council to support a financial strategy that over the medium term you get back to being compliant again. But if you needed some headroom in the short term to do that, then LGFA would, I think, be supportive of that.
Okay, and final question, and it is in regards to the analysis of Standard & Poor's. And so I'm assuming you've read their report and you've noted some of the strong words they've used?
Yeah, no, we subscribe to the Standard & Poor's research and we have good dialogue with their analysts as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Just about the end of the questions. Just one from me finally. Thank you for your questions, colleagues. Appreciate that. You talk about longer term loans and Hamilton City Council really, because of the uncertainty of waters, haven't moved down that pathway. Do you see, though, with the introduction of potentially CCOs for water services, that those longer term loans may become a better way for councils to be able to support the investment in waters infrastructure?
Yeah, we hope so. I absolutely agree with your point that the whole uncertainty, because councils thought they were getting a lot of debt repaid, meant they borrowed a lot shorter than perhaps they traditionally would have done. Long-dated infrastructure, especially with water CCOs, I think will lead to longer-dated borrowing from the water CCOs and councils if they retain water within their own balance sheet. So, I think by historical standards, the average council loan has now got quite short. So we would hope that it lengthens, and we think that'd be prudent. But again, most councils like yourselves have Treasury advisors that will advise you on your debt management strategy, and we will support, what loan applications you make.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you for your report, Andrew, and your presentation today. It's much appreciated. We welcome the opportunity to engage with you outside of these meetings also. And if the opportunity arises, I'm sure there's a lot of interest to be able to talk further on many of these points. So thank you very much.
And we're happy to come and speak to the council or the management team on water as you go through your deliberations to explain how that would work and how we can support the options that you intend to pursue.
Thank you very much. We do have a working group, so to think about all of the opportunities and options there. So yes, that's a great offer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, so that takes us to page 83 and the recommendation there that we receive the report. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Huata, thank you very much. Thank you. Look, it's great once again to have Andrew presenting to Council on LGFA matters, and I can see there's many benefits to Hamilton and our community in our continued investment in LGFA. There's also the discussions for us to have in the future about what our water CCO opportunity might be, and the way to be able to fund, and that means raising debt to make those investments in water infrastructure, also in other needs for Hamilton as well. So it's really great for us to be able to have that agency there that we can call on, because despite our Standard & Poor's rating, this is the best, cheapest source of funding for Hamilton, and the best way for us to fund our aspirations into the future. Some councillors have raised questions about our credit rating downgrade, and I think that despite that, Hamilton City Council remains committed to sound financial management, and those measures are being taking place through our long-term plan adjustments and other opportunities to be able to address concerns there. We continue, though, to be able to access those borrowing rates through the LGFA, and that minimises the impact on the overall borrowing costs at the most advantage for our residents. It's also important to note that it'll have a relatively small impact on our borrowing costs, and we heard at the last meeting, David mentioned $500 per every 1 million in future borrowings. I beg your pardon, and so, I mean, that's really manageable for our city, and it reduces, our risk. So while it might be confronting to have that downgrade, the trajectory I think that we're on with those changes that we've made to the LTP deliberations sets us on a path of a better future for our city. I'm out of time, so we'll allow our seconder to debate should she choose to. No, thank you. Any other speakers, colleagues? No? I beg your pardon, Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Chair Max. I have a document from the Local Government Funding Agency in front of me that's called How a Local Authority Participates in the Local Government Funding Agency Borrowing Structure. It's sobering reading if you consider the risks of things going wrong. Local authorities borrow on a secured basis by granting a charge over rates revenue in general. A charge over rates revenue is created by a local authority entering into a debenture trust deed. The debenture trust deed creates a security interest in favour of the local government funding authority, who holds the security for the benefit of the secured creditors of the local authority. The trust deed requires the debenture trustee to oversee and enforce the trust deed. If a local authority does not meet its financial obligations as a principal or as a guarantor, the secured creditor may make the demand by requesting the relevant trustee to enforce the security interest. If the security interest is enforced, the debenture trustee appoints a receiver. If a receiver is appointed, then Section 1152 of the Local Government Act applies. That states that the receiver can assess and collect in each financial year a rate under the section to recover sufficient funds to meet the payment of the local authority's commitments and the reasonable costs of administering, assessing and collecting the rate. This process can include the sale or lease of the property. So we are entering into guarantees against people's houses. We should do that with the utmost caution.
Thanks, Councillor Andrew. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I have no difficulty with LGFA. I mean, I could be concerned what they pay their chief executive. I could be concerned about all sorts of other things, but they're a lender, and as our good chairperson, our expert in this area, says, they're cheap. They're a cheap provider of funds. But more importantly, is it appropriate to borrow more? I mean, are we not running the risk that some would say we're already addicted to spending, we've got a 280% debt to revenue, and we want to increase it to 350. And there's no guarantee that as an elected body we won't spend it on nice to haves. So it's not much about how cheap it comes. The question should be, is the borrowing appropriate? And we have always used this narrative in Hamilton, but we're a growth council. We're a growth council. And although aspects of that is true, that does not negate our obligation to ensure we live within the means of our current ratepayers. And so I caution the narrative that we should, through a series of workshops and the next LTP, put together a plan that says, hey, don't worry, we're going to go to 350 because we're a growth council and we're okay. And just put aside the criticism of Standard & Poor's that we're weak financially, because we know best. Because we're just like every other local government in New Zealand. Trust us. Well, the poor ratepayer is getting tired of that narrative. And I'm looking forward to the next election.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of looking at a higher debt to revenue ratio, I think something to keep in mind is that we have a new water regulator. There will be economic regulation of water services and the delivery of those. They'll be looking at whether councils or CCOs are delivering the infrastructure required for growth, and whether they are keeping up in terms of renewing the assets, that they're keeping up to the appropriate standards. And so I think we will see a huge amount of pressure on us to increase our investment in water's infrastructure in this LTP amendment. And if we don't put together a plan that satisfies the new regulators, then there could be an intervention. So I think it's, we need, before making decisions around the debt to revenue ratio, we need to look at the state of play with waters and understand what's going to be required of us in terms of further investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. No other speakers today? Yeah. What I'll do, I don't need to write a reply. I think these things have been talked about enough. We're due a break, I think. So let's put that to the vote, and you'll find the motion when it comes up on page 83. Happy to move that. We've got a seconder. All of those in favour, raise your hand. Against?
Motion is passed unanimously.
Right, let's take a break, colleagues, and come back at 11:30. Yeah. the business for today. Thanks, councillors. We're now up to item 9 and page 146 of your diligent pack. Welcoming Tanya and Rachel, is it? Kia ora, Rachel. Thank you for your report. And the floor is open to you both.
Okay. Kia ora koutou, ko Tania Herman Tokawingoa, and this is Rachel McCormick, who's our contracts manager. So we'd just like to present to you the first report that we have, which is the facilities electrical maintenance contract. So just to note, councillors, that the purpose of this report is to increase the approved contract sum, noting that we have budget for this item. And the approval is to align it with the contract term so that we can use that contract term to our advantage. And the reason for the increase is that we were able to utilise this contract for maintenance and renewals projects earlier on in the piece while we prepared for a separate panel contract for our renewals work. I'm happy to take any other questions you may have.
Thanks, Tanya. I did have a question with regard to the 3 years and a further 2. We've had, over the previous term, the opportunity to have a look at social procurement and our procurement policy. My understanding is this is quite a large contract, that we've used some of the funding within that contract for other pieces of work. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So when we first initiated the contract in 2021, the market was quite tight, and to get I guess a value for council at that time, the longer term contract that was approved by council was more desirable because we could get better rates and also give a surety to a company to provide us with their ongoing works as the contract proceeded. So outside of that, so we used that contract for some of those capital works projects initially. Outside of this contract, we are able to also procure smaller contractors through other building contracts for electrical work as required.
Right. And so extending this contract wouldn't impact on our desire to then look for smaller jobs in other areas of council to be done by a different set of contractors, or?
Yeah, that's correct. So through this contract, we have a clear scope of works, which is on paragraph 13 of the report. In addition to this, we have other capital building works where there may be an electrical component required, and so that part can be subcontracted outside of this contract.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions. Are there any further questions? Councillor Bidder.
Thank you, Chair Max. Just want to see if I can simplify this. Is my understanding right that this is essentially a 50% increase in the cost for a 66% increase in the time frame? 2-year extension and for effectively 1.5 years of dollars.
Oh, Councillor Bidder, my maths not that quick.
Right.
So essentially what we're saying is that we had, at the time of procuring this contract and going for tender, we had used the budgets that we had expended previously to estimate how much that contract sum would be.
Yeah.
During the term of the contract, we have used a portion of that contract sum for other works outside of those outlined in paragraph 13.
Right.
So the increase of contract sum, and not in budget, because we are sticking within our financial budget, we're not increasing that budget. The increase in contract is to align it to the end date of the contract. So if your calculations are correct, I'll have to take your word for it, but yeah.
So that seems like a good deal. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions. I'm happy to move that, and I've already So, oh, it's okay, I've got councillor Bidder, who during the tea break had said he's up for seconding. So thank you for that. I've got no debate. Thank you, Tanya. Are you presenting the next item as well? Okay, I think we can suspend that you get away from the desk and while we debate and vote, but I have no debate. Andrew, did you want to debate anything? No? All right, let's take that vote then. All those in favour, raise your hand. Against? Oh, he had his hand up, yeah. Yep.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. Now to item number 10, almost the end of our open agenda, and that's the reticulated gas contract on page 150. Again to Tanya and Rachel.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This is a report to close out the emergency provisions that we undertook through the procurement policy. The background to this report is that in May we initiated a request for interest for gas, and as many as you will know that there is a short supply of gas across the country. And during that time we received no interest from gas suppliers, and so we went through MB to look at the all of government opportunities. And in July, MB confirmed that we were able to be part of that, but and indicated that we could get an extension of our contract for 1 year, but that there would be or could be an additional cost to that. In August of this year, MB did come back to us. We had approximately 10 working days to sign up to another allocation of gas for a 1 year period. That allocation of gas came via another large company in the country who had given up some of their allocation, and so that allocation had gone back on the market. So basically it was the allocation amount plus what that supplier would have been able to sell it for. So that has meant that our so we followed the procurement process under urgency, because if we didn't, the risk was that we would go on to a public rate, which could be even more cost than what the rate we were being offered, and that there was no guarantee of supply. So we have some critical infrastructure that has gas reliance, and one of those being the Gallagher's and Waterworld swimming pools, and our wastewater treatment plant for resilience as well. And so following that, it meant that the additional money that we require in budgets is $551,000 for year one. And $425,000 in year one of this year's long-term plan, and in year two it's an additional $126,000. So to enable us to undertake the contract sum has been increased by $4.2 million to $5.77 million. So happy to take any questions that you may have on that.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks. Just wondering if staff could give me a bit of an insight in what strategy do we have to move away from natural gas. I mean, this could have been a real single point of failure, right? In fact, that if we couldn't have got gas. So could you walk me through what we've got in plan, what you've got planned?
Sure. So through the long-term plan and then through a number of our renewals and compliance budgets, we have looked at where our gas usage is, and Rebecca will be able to fill in more detail, but for Waterworld, for example, we are converting some of the infrastructure there from gas to electricity. That's happening in this financial year. So Waterworld and Gallagher's aquatic centres are primarily our biggest users of gas. The next areas is within H3, where we've got changing rooms, and in our parks areas where we've got changing rooms. So as we go through and renew those assets, we're looking at the electricity and or solar options as well, because electricity is also a finite resource.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Maxine. In terms of, thank you firstly for the report, and in terms of moving away from gas, you mentioned Waterworld. Does Gallagher's, what is the timing for Waterworld, and do we have anything currently in the LTP to move Gallagher's away from gas?
So Waterworld is underway now, so we're in the planning process for Waterworld, and we will start some of the non-intrusive works to the facility this side of Christmas. So that's preparing the outer area, and then for the Waterworld scheduled shutdown sort of mid next year, we will then do the conversion at that time so that it's no more, no less interruption due to their close down anyway. So,
Okay. And with Gallagher's?
Gallagher's, Rebecca.
We do have some work scheduled at Gallagher's and within this long-term plan cycle, Councillor Sarah, but I can I can send around some specific details on the work.
Okay. Chair, yeah, that would be helpful. I think in general to have an update of
Can we
some
note
kind of
that?
information on
Yes.
where what is and isn't funded in terms of gas in the long-term plan. I think that came up in the climate advisory group. It would be helpful to have that really succinct kind of summary of that.
So can we note that as a staff
Thank
action to circulate that, whether it be by an executive update? It's probably the best way, I think. Yeah. Thank you, and we'll note that in the minutes. Any further questions of our presenters, team? No? I'm one of the signatories, so I think I'll step back from moving it. Does anybody else want to move the motion, please? Councillor Sarah, seconded by Councillor Casey Cox. Any, I beg your pardon, sorry Andrew, I didn't say you could second. However, so any debate?
Moving away from gas is one of the low-hanging fruit, I would say, in terms of reducing this organisation's emissions. Maybe a more challenging task for the wastewater treatment plant, but certainly I would like to see whether the $500 million in the LTP that is allocated to the wastewater treatment plant upgrade actually includes moving away from gas and the use of biosolids as well for energy production. And I think it would be helpful for us to have full visibility over what else is covered in terms of upcoming renewals and what isn't, and whether there is benefit in moving more quickly in terms of converting away from gas in some of these cases. Thank you.
Let's go to the vote then. All those in favour, if you could raise your hand. Against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, colleagues. That leaves a resolution to exclude the public. I'll move, and Andrew Bidder will second. Councillor Bidder. All those in favour? Thank you. So we'll suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes while we move into public excluded.